Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my favorite novels of 2021. So I've already done my nonfiction and my kind of miscellaneous category, as well as my most surprising books. I will link all of those down below, and today we're talking about my favorite novels that I read during the year. As with all of my favorites videos, this is not going to be like 2021 releases. These are just books that I read in 2020, or 2021 I mean. Quite a lot of these actually were new releases, but not all of them are. And I'm gonna actually start out, I know some people do like an honorable mentions category, and that's not exactly what this is. This is more like I had a few books that I could not decide if I should put them in my most surprising books video or my favorite books video. So I'm kind of tacking them on at the beginning of this video. By the way, I did rank my favorite books. As I always say, it's like fairly arbitrary. Like I did my best, but like these are all books I love so much that really like ranking them is like a little silly, but I think it's a fun exercise. But especially when we get to like the top kind of tier, it's like this is basically a 7-way tie. I just like love them all for different reasons. But anyway, okay, so starting off with my kind of most surprising / most favorite, I have North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I knew I was gonna like this book, but I did not anticipate just completely falling in love with it and reading it so quickly. I just did not want to put this book down. I was making excuses to read it instead of reading other things. Like, I just loved this. This is a classic novel, and why am I holding on this side? I usually hold on this side. That was weird. This is a classic novel, and we're following Margaret Hale and John Thornton. And it's like very well known for the romance between them, which I really loved. So Margaret and her family end up moving from their idyllic like village or town in the south of England to the north. It's based on Manchester, and it's like very industrialized. This is right after the Industrial Revolution, and Margaret ends up meeting John, and they do not hit it off at first. And both of them actually have a lot of growing to do. Margaret has to she's a bit of a snob. Like, she looks down on people who are in trade, and John Thornton is a very wealthy tradesman. And he also has a lot of growing to do because he, like, this is when unions were just being formed, and like that was a big deal, and obviously the owners of the mills were not happy about this, and John Thornton is one of the better ones. He treats his workers a lot better than a lot of the other owners do, but he still needs to learn that people being poor is not because they are bad, and it's not because they don't work hard. As the book goes on, we hear more about how John Thornton grew up and like his backstory and like how he was able to get where he is, and I think Elizabeth Gaskell does such a great job of showing how, like, you understand why John's experiences have taught him to think the way he did, but she also does a good job of showing how it's still unacceptable the way that he like thinks and talks about people. And so we see him grow a lot. Again, I love their romance. I love the writing of this book. Like, I'm so excited to read more things from Elizabeth Gaskell, and I also really I just love the commentary in this book, like the way it talks about like workers' rights and like unions, and this book also deals a lot with grief. I just really loved it, and I love the ending. I said this in my wrap up, but I think the ending of this is better than the miniseries one. Like, I do enjoy the miniseries, but I actually love the book even more, including the romance. Like, I really love it. I love how in love John is with Margaret, and he's like in denial about it. And they have some really good scenes together. Like, I love their dialogue and their banter, and that's one thing, like, I genuinely don't understand the sheer number of reviews saying that like Margaret Hale is like spineless or weak. It's like, she backtalks John. Like, every interaction they have is basically her like backtalking him, and the reader loves it and John loves it, and it's like, I just don't understand. But anyway, I loved that one. This is gonna be such a long video, you guys. We're only on the first book. I also wanted to mention Root Magic by Eden Royce, which I did actually mention in my most surprising books video, but I was like, this might end up in my favorites too. Obviously it did. This is the one that a lot of people were really anticipating, and I was pretty late to the party with this one, but I loved it. We're following our main character Jez, short for Jezebel, and her grandmother has just recently died. This book is set during 1963, so it talks about the desegregation of schools. It deals a lot with the racism of this era, and Jez and her brother Jay are finally learning more about root magic and root work, which their family has practiced for generations. It's like this combination of like herbalism and African-American folk magic that people use, but they also look down on. And so there's a lot of discussion of that. There's also some spookiness in this book, and yeah, I just loved the writing of this. Like, it's so well written. I love Jez as a main character. I think she was written really well, and I love how smart and compassionate she is. I love how close she is with her family. I love how she has her values and her morals, and she's not willing to give them up in order to learn root work. Like she wants to learn these traditional practices and honor those, but she also is like, I'm gonna do things my own way because I don't want to, like, I have lines that I don't want to cross, and I really love that. Yeah, I just found this book really, really compelling as well. I read it all in one night, stayed up much too late reading it because I just started and I didn't want to stop. So yeah, really loved this one. I also have Nine Coaches Waiting by Mary Stewart. This was my favorite Mary Stewart that I've read so far. I guess I should have mentioned, I gave North and South 4 stars, I gave Root Magic 5 stars, and I gave Nine Coaches Waiting 4.5 stars. I just, like, I don't think it's a problem that sometimes 5 stars don't end up on favorites lists, and then sometimes 4 and 4.5 stars do. Oftentimes favorite books are 5-star books, but not exclusively, and I think that's okay. Like, it makes sense to me. Anyway, that's too much to get into in this video, but Nine Coaches Waiting is so far my favorite Mary Stewart book. I can definitely see why people compare the like vibes to Jane Eyre, but I enjoyed this one a lot more. It's about our main character, what is her name? It's about our main character, Linda, who ends up getting a job with a wealthy family in France. And it's a really good job, so she takes it, and as soon as she gets there, there's like some weird things that she's not really sure what's going on. She's there to be basically a governess for this young boy, and I really, really loved their like relationship, like the way that they come to be each other's like found family is just really, really lovely. And throughout the book, there's just these really unsettling things that start happening, like accidents keep happening, but are they accidents? And this is another one that was just so compelling to read. Like I was like halfway through this one and it was already super late, but I'm like, I have to know, like I have to finish it, which always happens with Mary Stewart's books. But very glad my friend Margaret got me into her books. This is definitely my favorite so far, and I really love, I think his name is Philip. I can't remember for sure. I'm pretty sure it's Philip. The young boy that Linda ends up being the governess for. I love the way he's written. One of my favorite things about Mary Stewart's books is her characterization, and like specifically the way that the kids in her books feel like fully developed characters. Like I just loved that boy. I just didn't want anything bad to happen to him. And again, I just really loved his and Linda's like relationship. Like the way they take comfort in each other is just lovely. And yeah, this was an incredibly compelling book. I think the atmosphere was great. Like the tension is just so good. And I, yeah, really love that one. So far it's my favorite from her. And then my last in this kind of pre-favorites but also favorites category is Sisters of the Neversea by Cynthia Leitich Smith. I just really enjoyed this. This is a Peter Pan retelling, and it's by a Muskogee Creek author, and our 2 main characters are Wendy and Lily, and they're stepsisters in this book, and I loved their relationship so much. At the beginning of the book, they're kind of fighting because there is some question in their family about who is going to spend the summer with whom, and like what that means for their family and everything. So they're very close, but they're fighting right now. But then Peter Pan, and her name isn't Tinkerbell in this version. Is it just Belle? I think it's Belle. They show up and they whisk Wendy and their baby brother Michael away to Neverland, and Lily doesn't want to go, but she wants to help rescue her siblings, so she ends up going as well. And they get to the island, and as with the original story and most retellings, things are not what they seem. It seems like some dark, scary things are happening, and this island is not like the perfect paradise that it seems to be. And I just was so impressed by this book. There was a point where I wasn't sure. There were a couple of things that I personally think make Peter Pan retellings less interesting that a lot of authors tend to do. And I was thinking maybe that's the direction this was going in, but she ended up surprising me so much. I loved the way she did that. Again, I loved the characters, and like the family relationships in general are just so wonderful. I loved Lily and Wendy as main characters and their bond, and also I loved them separately. I love the way this book handled the elements of Peter Pan. This is a retelling where I think regardless of your feelings on the original story, you could really enjoy this one. Like I just love the way that she talks about, like she really addresses the problematic aspects of the original story. And I love what this book does thematically, the things it says about like family and like identity, and if people can change and how much people can change, and like forgiveness, and like the ending of this book just really had me in my feelings. Like I was already really enjoying it, but then what really made it like a 5-star and a favorite was the way that Cynthia Leitich Smith surprised me, and like the directions she took that I didn't think she would go in, and just everything all together. This was a fantastic book. I loved it. Okay, now into my official favorites list. The first one I have here is Soul Lanterns by Shaw Kuski, translated from the Japanese by Emily Balistrieri. This is a tiny little book. I think it's about 200 pages, but it really packs a punch. This book is set in, let's see, I keep checking for the year and it doesn't have the year, but I think it's the 25th anniversary of the United States bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's set in 1970, and we're following a few different main characters, this group of friends, although our primary main character is this young girl named Nozomi, and her class are doing a project on Hiroshima then and now. And so they end up going to a lot of their neighbors and family members and friends and talking about what happened during the bombing and like their experiences, and then afterwards, and like how this has really left this huge mark on these islands, like obviously. And these kids have, you know, grown up here, like, so they know the history, and like, for example, they have seen the graveyards where all of the tombstones have the same death date on them. So like they have this knowledge, they have these memories, even though they're very young and so they didn't live through the bombing themselves. Like they have this knowledge of growing up here and what that means. But it's after talking to people and getting their stories that they start realizing how much this has affected everybody. Like this book deals a lot with grief and trauma, obviously war and the bombings, and it definitely really goes there. Like this is a middle grade book, but it is much more specific about some of the things that happened to people and the ways people died and the ways people lost people than I think I was expecting, even though, again, I read a lot of pretty dark middle grade. I was still surprised at how specific this one was, but I think it is so well worth it. I have said every time I talk about this book that I think it is especially important for Americans to read this book, but I think anybody could get something out of it. Like the things that this book says about like war and peace and loss and grief are just incredible. There's also an element, so one of the other kind of main storylines is Nozomi goes with her family to the lantern lighting ceremony, which I believe is specifically for people who died during the bombings. And she one night she sees her mother light a lantern and she doesn't know who the lantern is for. And so Nozomi ends up learning a lot more about her family and like her history and like things that she didn't know before. So there's also a lot of emphasis on like family in this book. So this is definitely a rough book to read in places, but it is so important. It's so well written. Like just the impact of this book is incredible. Like it really obviously left an effect on me. And I think it's really well done. I do want to mention that some people didn't like the writing. They felt that it was too simplistic. I think it was a very specific choice on the author's part, and I think it really worked for the story they were telling. And you can tell it's a deliberate choice because we see some letters near the end of the book that are written in a different way. So I think it's clear that this is like a deliberate artistic choice, and it's one that I personally think really worked for the story. But again, highly recommend. It is hard to read in places, but it's so important and so well told. Next, I have Song of the Crimson Flower by Julie C. Dow. This is a fantasy romance, I guess, and it's set in the world of the Forest of a Thousand Lanterns series, but you can read this as a standalone, which is what I did because I had no interest in those other books. It does talk about like the ending of some things in those books, but because I had no intention of reading this one, I was fine, and like I was fine knowing that, and I don't think it was confusing at all. And I have to give a mention to my friend Margaret from The Word Nerd because her review is what convinced me to pick up this book, because the tropes didn't sound like things I would like necessarily, but I ended up loving it. So we are following two main characters, Bao and Lan, and Bao has been in love with Lan for a very long time, but because of various things that end up happening that you find out right at the beginning of the book, Lan thinks that Bao is somebody else who Lan is actually in love with. When she finds out that's not the case and Bao kind of like declares himself to her, she is really upset, and so she turns him down in a really hurtful way. She says some things that she regrets later, and so Bao ends up leaving. He's obviously very upset, and he gets himself cursed, so that he is like now connected to this flute that he has, and Lan has to help him break the curse, and they end up being like forced to travel together because of the way this curse works. And I just love this so much. I loved Bao and Lan's character development. Like we really see Bao realize that he had put Lan kind of on this pedestal, that he didn't really know her that well, so we see him start to get to know her better and also be more confident in himself. I really loved Lan's character growth as well. Like we see that as she's going on this adventure, that she has kind of like tamped down parts of her personality because of the way she was raised to be this like highborn lady who was going to marry well and be very respectable and all of that. Like the fact that she used to love adventure, and like we didn't see that, and like she gets to rediscover that now. I really loved that. I loved the relationship between Bao and Lan. Like just this romance is so good. I mentioned in my wrap up that several of the plot points seem engineered solely for the purposes of the ship, and I did not mind at all. I just really liked it. I thought the world building was done really well. Like, this is a fairly short fantasy book, but like, I think that you get a really good idea of the world and the characters and like the plot aspects. Like, there are other plot things happening that I think the book dealt with pretty well. There is some parallels between this book and the way that poppy and opium was used against different Asian countries. So there are some serious elements to this book as well, and I think those were done really well. But I also think that the romantic and the fun stuff was done really well. Like, I just had a really, really great time with this book, and I'm really glad I read it. Next, I have King and the Dragonflies by Case and Callender. This is a contemporary novel, and we're following our main character King, and pretty close to the start of this book, his older brother Khalid had died, and he and his family, like he and his parents, are really not dealing with this grief very well. It's really hard on all of them, and they're not really working through it with each other. They're all kind of isolated, and King is convinced that his brother turned into a dragonfly. So he's looking for him. He goes to the bayou every day to try and figure out which of these dragonflies is his brother. And King and Khalid were really, really close. They really loved each other and had a really close relationship. But then we also find out that shortly before Khalid's death, he had convinced King to stop seeing his best friend Sandy, because Sandy is gay and everybody kind of knows this, and Khalid said, like, well, you don't want people to think you're gay too, do you? And so King had listened to him, and so he stopped hanging out with Sandy, and we see how much he misses him. We also see King get to know his own identity better and start to figure out his own feelings. And like, this book is just so well written. It deals so well with things like internalized homophobia, and also racism. It also deals with things like abuse and grief, and also like families and how complicated they are, and if people can change. And just, I loved this book. Like, it was so emotional, so well done. I loved King and I felt for him so much, and I just wanted people to love and accept him. And I also thought the way Sandy's character was written was really well done. I think the actual writing of this book was wonderful. It's like really like understated lovely, I think, is kind of how I describe it. Like, it's not like flashy, but it's very smooth, and again, like the characterization, the themes, like the emotional impact of this book. And I just think that this is a great example of how middle grade can deal with really, really heavy topics just in really impressive ways. So highly recommend this one. Next, I have The Mirror Season by Anna Marie McLemore. Anna Marie McLemore is one of my favorite authors, so it is no surprise this book is on this list, but I thought this was fantastic. This is another one that deals with really heavy topics. This book deals very extensively with sexual assault, so do keep that in mind if you're thinking of picking this one up. By the way, I will list content warnings for all of the books that I talk about in the description box. But I thought this was fantastic. This is also a retelling or kind of take on the Snow Queen fairy tale. And I think the way that McLemore used that fairy tale with the story they were telling was just really impressive. Like, I think those things were blended beautifully. I also want to mention that even though the writing is still wonderful and lovely and rich, which I love about their books, I think if you've struggled with their flowery writing in the past, you might give this one a try, because this writing and this story feels much more grounded. This one reads the most like a contemporary out of all of their books I've read so far, so that might be something to keep in mind. But I loved these characters so much. This book starts with Graciela, or Ciela, and she is still dealing with the aftermath of a sexual assault that involved her and this boy named Locke. And when they realize that they're in the same class, this makes things very complicated, because Ciela remembers something about their attackers that Locke doesn't, and so she doesn't know if she wants to she doesn't know how she can keep that from him. Like, that would be wrong, but she also doesn't know if it would be good to tell him about that. Like, she's carrying this secret and she doesn't know what to do with it. And the way that her and Locke end up getting to know each other and like care about each other and lean on each other, like they do come together through what happened to them, but you also see that their connection is not just that, it's much deeper than that. I also really loved the elements we get with Ciela's like family bakery, because she has this ability to tell exactly what pastry somebody needs, but then she loses that ability after her attack, and so we see her kind of dealing with that. And like, I just love this book so much. It's about trauma and healing and how you don't have to go through things alone. Again, it does deal with some very dark subject material, so keep that in mind, but I think ultimately, like a lot of Anna Marie McLemore's books, like all of them really, it doesn't just deal with grief and suffering, it also deals with healing, and not in a way that like cheapens what has happened, or that brushes over it or overlooks it, but in a way that feels very hard-earned and very like genuine. Yeah, I just loved this book. I am struggling to articulate how good it is, but it was fantastic. Also, not that this affects the story, but I do think this is a really gorgeous cover. I love it. Next, I have the only 4.5 stars, smack in the middle of my favorites list of 5 stars, because I told you that happens sometimes. And that is The Theft of Sunlight by Intisar Kanani. This is the first book in a spin-off duology to Thorn, so we're following a different main character, and that is Ray. And for several years now, there have been these people called the Snatchers who are kidnapping children in the kingdom, and they disappear. Very few of them make their way back, and if they do manage to escape and come back, they're very different. They are not just traumatized by what happened to them, but there seems to be something else going on too, where they don't feel the same. And nobody knows what happens to these kids. Like if they suspect that they're being like trafficked into slavery or something else. And when our main character Ray has a friend of hers go missing, she decides she has to do something about it. And she feels like the court and the palace are not doing enough to find the Snatchers, are not really doing anything. And she has some family connections at the palace, so she decides to go and stay with her cousin and her husband at the palace to try and figure out what is being done and if she can get the court to do anything. And when she gets there, she ends up becoming a lady-in-waiting to the princess. And Ray doesn't want to do this. She doesn't think that she would be a good fit for this, but she thinks she can do a lot of good there. So she ends up agreeing to stay here while she tries to figure out what is happening with the Snatchers. She ends up kind of joining forces with a street lord named Bren, very reluctantly, and the two of them are some of the only people who seem to be doing something about the Snatchers. So I loved this book. I loved Ray as a main character. She also has a club foot, and this book does deal with ableism. We see how, because of the way people have treated her, Ray is understandably very distrustful of very conventionally attractive people because of the way that many of them have treated her. But we also see her realize throughout the book the difference between listening to your instincts about people and listening to your like judgments, like your prejudices about people. And I just think her character arc was done beautifully. I also really loved Bren. I mentioned how he's such an interesting character because Ray is kind of not sure what to make of him, and I was too, because he does some good things sometimes for bad reasons, but then he also does bad things for good reasons, and he's just very hard to pin down. But I love him. So he was just a really wonderful character. I thought the politics and the plot of this book was really, really engaging, really gripping. The way this book ends, I need book 2, like immediately. It's only a few months to wait, thankfully, but like, I just really, really loved this book. I am so invested in these characters and with what happens. And I also really loved like the thematic discussions this book has, and the way it deals with these heavy issues. I just am really impressed by this, and I think Intisar Kanani is just going to end up being a favorite fantasy author for me because I love the way that she writes and tells stories. Next, I have Ophi's Ghosts by Justina Ireland. This is a historical fiction with a paranormal aspect, and as I have mentioned before, my wonderful friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly actually gifted me this copy that she like annotated. So it was a really fun kind of semi-buddy read, and I loved this book so much. So we're following our main character Ophi, and something terrible happens at the beginning of the book that enables her to see ghosts. And then because of this horrible thing that happened, her family end up moving north as part of the Great Migration, and Ophi ends up getting a job in the same wealthy manor house that her mother works at. And when she gets there, Ophi starts to get to know some of these ghosts. One ghost in particular, Ophi's kind of making friends with this ghost, but she's also wondering, like, again, what happened to her. And she's also been warned against getting to know ghosts too well, so there's that aspect as well. There's a lot of like family secrets, and this book obviously deals a lot with racism, and especially with racism in the North, and how it wasn't like this like utopia for African Americans like it was kind of like shown to be and set up to be. Like it was just different kinds of racism, like kind of sneakier about it really. So this book deals with that a lot. And I just thought this was fantastic. I've mentioned before how one of my favorite things is when books use speculative elements to do social commentary. And I think this book did a great job with that. I loved Ophi as a main character. She is just so determined and strong and spunky and smart, and I loved her. I really enjoyed following her. I loved the writing of this book and how it has like these kind of whimsical descriptions, but it's also very grounded, and I love the way that Justina Ireland did this, like balance the story with the supernatural aspect, with the characters, with historical aspects and everything. I just think all of that worked together really well. So yeah, really loved this book. Okay, I had to change my battery, so things look different, that's why. we're just gonna keep going. Next I have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I've talked about this book a lot recently, but this was a huge surprise for me because I have said before, I have seen adaptations I liked, but I didn't really have particularly strong feelings about this story, but I've always meant to read the original, like, novella. It's very short, it's like 70 something pages, and I finally did this Christmas, or around this Christmas, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I love this so much more than the adaptations. I think the adaptations tend to soften things that the story itself doesn't. Like, this is a really scathing critique of things like commercialism and capitalism and exploitation of workers and the poor, and like it talks about the importance of like opportunities, like how wealth gives you opportunities even for basic things like healthcare, and like this is such a revolutionary book, and I think that gets dampened a lot in adaptations. Like, I just really love this. We're obviously following our main character, Ebenezer Scrooge, who is a horribly selfish, greedy, cruel man, who at the very beginning of the book is given the chance to redeem himself. He is visited by three spirits, the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come, who take him to see like memories, like things that have happened, things that are currently happening, and things that may happen or will happen, and basically to try and convince him to change. And I just, yeah, I loved this. I love Charles Dickens' writing. It's so clever and funny. Like, the way this story starts just cracks me up. It's like, Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. And he goes on for a little bit, and then he says, you will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Like, there's some great humor like that. I love the way he writes, but then this is also a really, like, this book has a lot of emotional depth as well, which is one of the other things I think tends to get adapted out of some adaptations sometimes. Like, I just love what this book says and does, and like, it just really was very moving. I just fell in love with it, and again, I was not necessarily expecting to, because I thought I knew what to expect from this story, and I didn't quite, and it was great. And the story is like not nearly as saccharine as I think some adaptations can be, which I have enjoyed adaptations. I don't mean to be really down on them, but I think a lot of the things that I love about this story are things that don't come through as clearly in the film versions. And like I said, this wasn't overly saccharine. There were a couple of moments that maybe veered a little that direction, but overall it was really, really genuine. Also, for me personally, it was really cool to see a story that centered on what Christmas is supposed to be about, if you do celebrate Christmas, and not like specifically for the nativity or anything, but like how it is supposed to be a day where, more than all others even, you are generous and you are kind and you have hope even when it's difficult and things like that. So not saying that you do have to celebrate Christmas to enjoy this book or get things out of it, because I know that's not the case, but that was just something that occurred to me as I was reading it. And yeah, I'm so glad I finally read this. I have very mixed feelings on Charles Dickens as an author overall, but this book at least was a huge success for me. Next I have Burning Bright by Melissa McShane. This is the first book in the Extraordinaries. I just dropped some books. Or they just slid off something. This is the first book in the Extraordinaries series, which is an alternate historical fiction plus fantasy series, and it's a companion series. So we're following our main character, Eleanor, and she is an extraordinary scorcher, and in this world, there are different talents that people can have, and not everybody has them, but some people do. And then what is very, very rare is if you're an extraordinary in that talent, and that gives you kind of not just enhanced abilities, but different abilities. And so Eleanor is the only scorcher that's been born in England for like 100 years or something, and not only can she set fires, but she can actually put them out, which nobody else can do. And when she is faced with the prospect of a horrible arranged marriage that she doesn't want, she goes to the Navy and enlists, and she ends up on Captain Miles Ramsey's ship, and neither of them are thrilled with certain aspects of this. He definitely believes in her abilities, and he thinks it's really important that she like work on the side of the Navy and everything, but there are various reasons why it's not super convenient. Like, for example, some of the men on the ship are really not happy about having a woman on board and that kind of thing. But it was really satisfying to see Eleanor and Miles get to like know and respect each other, and also seeing like the other crewmen like get to respect Eleanor. It was just incredibly satisfying. One thing I really like about this book is that it is grounded in a particular historical period, but because there's magic and because it's like alternate history, certain things haven't happened the same way, you don't have to have all of the same obstacles that would have been true in history. So like there is sexism in this world, there is colonialism, like there are still those things, unfortunately. But for instance, it's really interesting to see that this is set during the Napoleonic Wars, and England has become so desperate that they are willing to let women do things like enlist in the Navy. And so it's really interesting to see how that has changed some of the ways like that gender roles work. Like they're not completely gone, definitely, but it does change it a little bit, which I thought was really interesting. I also really loved Eleanor as a main character. I really loved the romance in this book, and I just found this really compelling as a story. Like this is another one I stayed up way too late reading, and also the vast majority of this book takes place on a ship. And we know I don't like ship books, so the fact that I loved this one so much I think speaks pretty highly in its favor. But yeah, I just really fell in love with this book, and this is like, I've had a good feeling about Melissa McShane as an author. I heard about her from Tatiana Night Owl, and I've seen a lot of her reviews for her books, and I've just always felt like she'd be an author that really worked for me, and so far I think that is definitely the case. Like I think she's going to be a favorite author for me, so I really loved this. Next, I have a standalone fantasy that I think I have a review either up already or coming up soon, hopefully soon. That is A Dragonbird in the Fern by Laura Ruckert. I loved this book so much. We are following our main character Giara. By the way, this is one of my most anticipated releases for the year, so feeling pretty good about that. So obviously this really lived up to my expectations. We're following our main character, Princess Giara, and shortly before the start of this book, her older sister Scylla was murdered. And obviously Giara and her family are really struggling with that grief. They're having a hard time. They really miss her. And then to make matters worse, in this world, if somebody is murdered and their killer is not brought to justice, that person's spirit can come back to Earth as an Earthwalker, which is basically like an increasingly vengeful ghost. So Giara and her family are not only dealing with the grief of losing this person who they love, but also seeing her start to wreak havoc and start to put other people in danger. And Scylla had been engaged to marry this king of this neighboring kingdom, and Giara decides that she will go through with the engagement and the marriage in her sister's place, because she finds out, she finds some evidence that seems to suggest that her sister's killer is from this other kingdom. And so Giara decides, like, if she can get there and like be in this kingdom, and she might be able to figure out what happened to her sister and bring her killer to justice and finally put her sister's spirit at rest. So she does that. She goes through with the marriage, and this is going to be really hard on her because Giara is also dyslexic. So she's in a kingdom where she doesn't even speak the language, and she also she's kind of grown up thinking that she's not very smart or she's not very good at things because she sees language differently from people, and there's no word for dyslexia in this world, and also people are not really willing to make even the most basic concessions for her. So this has really enforced her belief that she is not very good at things and she's not very smart, but that's obviously not true. And it's so satisfying to see Giara like grow to be proud of herself and grow to realize her own strength, and it's just so incredibly satisfying. I love Giara as a main character. I also really loved the romance that develops. I really love this book. Like, this book's use of language, I think is super interesting. I was really, like, I'm not like a linguist or anything, but I was really impressed with the way that we do see Giara not speaking this language as being a real obstacle for her, but we also see her figure out ways to eventually start learning the language and to also work around her limitations in that area in a way that I found really satisfying. Also the like plot aspect of this book, like the murder mystery and everything and the politics and all of that, I found incredibly gripping and really interesting. I also liked the world and how well developed all of these different like cultures and belief systems were. Yeah, I just really loved this. If you're looking for a standalone fantasy that I, once again, read incredibly quickly, really recommend this one. I thought it was fantastic. Okay, we are down to my top 3 picks. And I've said that basically this whole list, like, I love them all so much that the differences between them are really minuscule, but especially for the top few, like, I did put them in an order, but on any given day, I could change my mind. So these are all wonderful. But in the number 3 spot, I have Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This is the first book in a duology, but you definitely get this arc wrapped up really satisfying, like at the end of this book, so don't feel like the story's gonna cut off in the middle or anything. And this is a Goose Girl retelling, and it's a really interesting one because our main character Vanya is actually the maid from that story, which if you know that fairy tale, it's a really interesting way to tell a story. So Vanya has taken the place of this princess, and she is using this opportunity to steal some jewels from like rich people that she interacts with. And she's trying to get enough money that she can escape her godmother's influence, because her godmothers are death and fortune. And Vanya is kind of, she's tired of like living under their influence and she wants to escape. So she's trying to get enough money for this. And then to make matters even more stressful, she finds out that the princess's fiance, this horrible monster of a man, is coming back in town much sooner than she thought he was going to. Like, she thought she'd be able to get out of here before she had to meet him, and now it looks like that's not going to happen. And then to make matters even more complicated, a like junior prefect shows up who is starting to investigate all of these suspicious thefts of jewelry from rich people. So Vanya has a lot going on, and I just love this book so much. This is one of those books where, like, I just read the first few pages and I just felt like this was going to be a favorite, and obviously it was. The writing itself is wonderful. Like, I love the kind of folklore feeling to it, but it's not overly flowery. I also really like the humor. It's like, it's a style of humor that I don't always love, but it felt perfect for Vanya, and it didn't like overwhelm the story or anything. Like, I just really enjoyed that. I loved Vanya herself. Like, she's a character type that I have said before, I think a lot of authors think they can do, and I personally don't think all of them can. Or maybe it's just that I'm very picky about how they're written, because Vanya is a character who is very much like out for herself. She's very like self-focused in terms of like her choices and everything like that. But I think she was written really well, because we find out her backstory in little pieces as the book goes on, and you totally understand why she has grown up thinking that she can't rely on people, because in a lot of cases she can't. And something else that I love is that even from the beginning of the book, we see that, yeah, like, okay, Vanya, she is like making choices based on what's best for herself rather than trying to help other people sometimes, but there are still lines that she doesn't want to cross. And I just really appreciated that, and I just loved Vanya as a character so much. I felt for her so much. I loved that we got to see throughout this book her finding people who do care about her and who do treat her well. And I think the supporting characters are also like wonderfully developed. Like, I loved Emmerich so much. I love that boy. He was great. I also thought that the princess character, she was written in a way that was really interesting, and like her and Vanya's relationship is so messy and complicated and ugly in a lot of ways, but you still care about it, and I really admired the way that was done. Just like the supporting characters in general, I think were written really well. I really liked the world and like the use of folklore and all of that. Again, I mentioned I love the writing. Also, I have to show off these really gorgeous illustrations that Margaret Owen does herself. Like, they're just beautiful. I love them so much. And they're like used as like introductory kind of illustrations for these short tales that we get, and like just the craftsmanship of this book I could gush about all day, but I need to move on. But yeah, I really love this, and this is another one that I found every like ingredient in the story was perfectly balanced. Like the characterizations, there's also a romance. Our two leads are demisexual, which I feel like is not something we see a lot. The characterization was just fantastic. The writing, like the plot and the like engagingness of the story, I guess, like everything just came together beautifully, and I am kind of obsessed with this book, so I need more people to read it. Okay, and then in my number 2 spot, this is kind of cheating, but they're 2 books in the same series. Even though they're the companion books and they're different stories, like, I'm counting them as one entry and you can't stop me. But that is Half a Soul and 10,000 Stitches, both by Olivia Atwater. These are the first 2 books in the Regency Fairy Tale series. I have not read the 3rd one yet, but I love these books so much. Oh my gosh. I'm like running out of ways to talk about books I love by the end of this video. Half a Soul, we're following our main character Dora, and when she was very young, she got half her soul ripped away by a fairy, because this is a like basically Regency England plus magic, as you can tell by Regency Fairy Tales. And there are fae in this world, and they are very much the like frightening but beautiful, like don't make a bargain with them but you're really intrigued by them, like that kind of like fairy portrayal. And so yeah, Dora got half of her soul ripped away, which means that she is unable to feel fear, embarrassment, or even happiness. So a lot of her emotions are very muffled, and her cousin, who was actually the one who helped save her from getting all of her soul ripped away, they're taking her cousin to London for the season to try and find her a suitable match, but her cousin has an ulterior motive. She thinks that if they can get the Lord Sorcier of England, this man named Lord Elias Wilder, if they can get Elias to help Dora, she thinks that he might be able to do something to restore her soul or to like help her in some way, because he's like the most powerful magician in England, or sorcerer in England. And Dora and Elias do end up meeting each other, and it does not go well the first time. And I actually did not like Elias. Like the first couple times we interact with him, I'm like, not a fan. But I grew to love him so, so much, and I think one of the reasons I could forgive his behavior, even though I wish he still had been nicer to Dora, but there's a couple of reasons that I forgave him. One is that because Dora's feelings are a little bit different, she just like gave it right back to him. Like she was not hurt or embarrassed or anything. She was a match for him, basically. And also we find out why Elias is acting the way he is, and it's not just like generic brooding man who gets to treat people however he wants. Like, that's not what happens. He actually has very specific reasons for like being frustrated with people, and he also has been in the war and he has PTSD, and like there's reasons where I think it actually makes sense. Like, I do think he still could have been nicer to Dora, but I get why he wasn't, and I just grew to love him so much by the end. I loved his and Dora's dynamic. I love Dora just as a character, and I am so impressed with the way that Olivia Atwater could like write her in a way where you could tell that she was different than she was supposed to be because of like her emotions and everything, but you can also see very clearly that she does have feelings. Like, she does love people and care about people, and she does like feel things like hurt and happiness. Like, some of it is muffled and it hurts to see that muffled, but like she is still a person, and I just really love that. I also love how both of these books in the series so far have really leaned into the idea of like justified anger, and how sometimes like people think that they're good when really they're just polite, and like it just, like, both these books in the series really lean into the importance and the necessity of anger. And I just really love that. I find that very, like, I'm just really like vibing with that theme right now. And just like, I love the way this book shows how important that is to making change in the world. And yeah, I love this book. And then I also want to mention the companion book. So this is we're following a different character, it's a completely different story, but I do recommend reading them in order. And in this one, we're following Effie, who is a maid in a wealthy house, and she has kind of gotten a crush on like the young man in the house, but she's trying not to, she knows she shouldn't act on it, she doesn't want to do anything about it, so she's trying to just ignore it, basically. But then she gets saddled with a very well-meaning, but very uninformed fairy godfather, like a literal fairy godfather, because he is one of the fae that we meet in the first book, and his name is Lord Blackthorn, and he tries so hard. He always does his best, but because he doesn't really understand humans that well, he does not always do the most helpful thing. But I loved him as a character. I loved him and Effie both. I really loved their interactions and their dynamic, and like the way the book starts is or like kind of what sets off the premise is that they make a deal where Lord Blackthorn is like, I'm gonna make you marry the man of your dreams. This is gonna be great for you. And the deal is that Effie has the length of time of 10,000 stitches because she sews. She has 10,000 stitches to get this young man of the house to fall in love with her. And if she doesn't, then she is like forfeit to like, and Lord Blackthorn gets to like take her to fairyland and all of this. And this is kind of like a loosely inspired Cinderella story, but like it's not, it's like a very, very loose retelling. It's more like informed by that idea, and I loved it so much. Once again, we have an emphasis on like the power and necessity of righteous anger, specifically women's anger, which I loved. I loved Effie as a character. She's just so like practical and kind and smart, and I love that this book focuses so much on like the working class, because I feel like a lot of historical fantasy doesn't, and I love that we get that here. I really loved her friendship with Lydia, one of the other maids. I love the commentary in this book on like class and wealth. Again, I love these characters. Yeah, these books just make me so, so happy. Each of these books I read in one night. Like, basically, I stayed up all night reading Half a Soul, and then the next night I stayed up all night and read 10,000 Stitches, and I just love these books. They're just this really wonderful mix of like thoughtful and also fun and also romantic and also like, I don't know, inspiring. So I love these so much. Highly, highly recommend. I think, because these like are indie published books, which several of the books on this favorites list are, and I think Olivia Atwater is actually getting Half a Soul published by, I think, Orbit, if I'm not misremembering, in 2022. So that's pretty exciting. So get on the bandwagon, you guys, because she's great. Okay, and then finally, the book that I have, at least today, as my number one is Amber and Clay by Laura Amy Schlitz. I love this so much. This was the buddy read with my friend Mariana from Mariana Mas Books, and both of us loved this book. It was a reread for her. This is a novel in verse, and it's set in ancient Greece. We're following several different main characters, but our two like primary characters are this young boy named Roscos, who is enslaved, and this wealthy young noble girl named Mellisto. And the book is about their lives, but then also their friendship, like how they meet each other. And they don't meet each other until very far into the book, actually. And that is something I'm just so impressed with, that Laura Amy Schlitz could sell me on their friendship being so meaningful when it happens in a relatively short amount of time. And I think part of that is just because you get to know and love these characters separately so much that as soon as they meet and interact, you can understand why they would have this connection and why they would instantly be, or not instantly, but quickly be so important to each other. This book is really, really emotional. Like, it does this thing that some other books have done where like the book even warns you about certain things that are going to happen, and it's still a gut punch when it does. But it was just beautifully done. I also want to mention that Julia Iredale did the illustrations. And the reason there are illustrations is because this book is told in such an interesting way. So it is interspersed with different exhibits that are like archaeological artifacts. And that sounds like a really weird way to tell a story, but I promise it works and it doesn't feel disjointed. Like, this whole book feels so cohesive and well put together. Again, most of it is in verse. There's one character whose story is told in prose. And then also I love how Hermes is one of the main narrators of the story. I just love that. Like, he's so interesting. I really am impressed with the way that Laura Amy Schlitz could, like, she draws on traditional depictions of him, but then also kind of makes his characterization her own. I love that the way, like, through the way he tells the story, you can see that he's not human, you know, and that you can tell that he's different. Like, he's writing about these humans, he's a god, so he sees them differently, but also how maybe he's more human than he thinks he is. Like, I just really love that. I also think this book does a great job of, like, talking about the historical context for things, like, while not excusing it or, like, endorsing it. Like, this is another book that I'm just, like, in awe at the craftsmanship of. I just love it so much. Like, I know that personal taste is always going to be a factor, but in terms of quality of storytelling, like, this is just a really incredible book. Like, the characterization, the writing style, and how, like, the prose and verse is both written really well. The choice of narrators, the choice of structure for this book, the different, like, themes it deals with, like grief and abuse and friendship, and, like, the way it ties into, like, historical, like, artifacts and like historical fact, like things we know, but then how, like, Laura Amy Schlitz, like, made it her own story, and just, like, the emotional impact of this book is, like, incredible. Like, I've mentioned before that, like, my favorite books, or my favorite, like, any kinds of art, it often or even always is something that has to engage my heart and my head. Like, those things are, like, inextricably connected for me. Like, I don't feel like I really love a story or, like, a piece of art or something if it doesn't engage me in both of those ways. And I feel like really good storytellers do that, and this is a great example of that. So anyway, those are my favorite novels of 2021. This was an incredibly long video, so thank you if you watched this whole thing. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Obviously, I recommend all of them extremely strongly. So let me know that, and let me know one of your favorite books that you read in 2021. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!